Welcome, listeners, to episode 12 of the Simply Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Josh K, and I'd like to thank you guys for tuning into today's episode. Firstly, if you liked the episode, please drop a like, drop a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, IPS Insurance. Insurance so good, you'd hope something bad happens to you. And I'd thank you guys for supporting the show in any way that you can. This week, for the 12th episode, we are going to change it up a little. I want to give you, the listeners, the opportunity to get involved with my show. So I post on my social medias. If you had any questions or comments you wanted to ask me about the show or any opinions that I have, I wanted to give you guys that chance. So I have brought in my trusty producer behind the scenes, my dad, to ask me some of your questions. We're going to have a fun time. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And, we're going to have fun with it. Just to warn before, there were a lot of people that answered and sent in questions. Some of them definitely were similar or the exact same question. So if I don't mention yours, know that it was probably the same idea that's something else that was mentioned. But we might as well get into it. And here he is. My behind-the-scenes producer, the guy I've brought in. We're going to have a great time today, Dad. We're going to have some pretty funny conversations. I looked at the questions before, and there's some interesting ones. So we might as well get into it. You want to start us off with our first one?
Josh, I want to start off by saying my dream in life was to be your sidekick. It's a very important day in my life. I'm no joke. All right, so
I've already made an appearance on the show. Don't worry. I needed to bring you back. That's what the fans wanted.
I'm an old guy, so the glasses are going to come on and off all day. But okay, so let's, near and dear to my heart is obviously the mix of sports and athletics. So right out of the gate, we got a great question from Nate Kang, who says, how important is education when it comes to student athletes? Great question.
It's a very good question. I'm sure you definitely have an opinion on that, only because you've realized, with me being a student athlete as well as my older brother. But for me, one of the biggest things is that sports has actually, in a huge way, helped my student life in school, for sure. Sports, especially the squash in particular, has just kind of taught me things, organizing, and really just like figuring out a way to work out some stresses. And so when it comes to education, it just seems that it gets you involved, and it opens up opportunities for you when you are a student athlete, in my opinion. And I know for me, that in the squash community, like, I'm going to have so many opportunities outside with education because of the people I know in sports. Yeah, I'm sure you can relate to that.
Right. For sure. I mean, even at the beginning, I just love that you guys both, because in your physical training, you're sort of grinding out a point, you're grinding out a workout, that you're also now grinding out, getting through a paper that's due, or an extra hour of studying when it's sort of easy to bail. I always noticed that was something you did. So anyway, great question from Nate there. This next question is from Aiden Knight. Good one. Do you think LeBron's new ring makes the GOAT conversation more on his side? Great question.
It's a very good question.
Opinion here, but
very up for debate. And how
that will be a lifelong debate.
It always will. You're right. And that's the biggest thing is, I don't know if, like, obviously I think I am into basketball probably a little more than you are, but you have been into basketball way longer than I have, which includes you have seen Jordan play and you've also seen LeBron play. You can actually relate to this conversation. I never watched Jordan play. I never, of what I've heard, witnessed him game by game, season by season, actually change the game of basketball, right? He himself, and which is one of the biggest arguments for why he is considered the GOAT, is he went out and changed the sport, like no question. And I know LeBron, he's in year 17. He's still going strong. Like he's 36 years old and he's still a top 5 player in the league. Like he's super impressive. Got to give it to him. But in my opinion, I don't even think if LeBron wins 2 more rings that people will consider him the GOAT over Jordan. I still think that based on how much Jordan impacted the game and you look back at that era of basketball, I just don't think I can see an argument that would consider outright 100% LeBron's the GOAT. I don't see an argument.
So my thoughts are a couple thoughts. So number one is, it's a different time, right? I mean, it's like talking about the difference between Tyson and Muhammad Ali, for example. It's really hard to sort of make that because they were just such different times, and in the time of Jordan, it's only been in recent years, I'd say, in the grand scheme of sort of modern day basketball that one player can literally put the entire team on their shoulders and run with it. And Jordan, I think, did that, but again, it was more of a team aspect. It was more Jordan Pippen. But before that, there were always duos. It wasn't ever one singular guy. And I think he was, in my opinion, one of the first guys that he was the singular guy that stood out, that said, no matter, so long as he's in the game, the team's winning. And LeBron does it now, but I mean, he wasn't the first to do it. He wasn't the first to sort of break through. On a side note, as a beard guy, I don't think you can be the GOAT and have a crappy beard like LeBron has. I just think it's fundamentally wrong. I'm offended and I'm sticking by it.
I think that's the smartest thing you've ever said.
Well, yeah. Okay, I'm going to go on another question. This is an interesting one because I really am trying, when I read it, I kind of thought, do these people actually collaborate to come up with one singular question? We got Leanne and Amelia who came up with a collective question between the two of them. So I don't know. I'd like to know what the process was where they got it. If you could make a choice in the future between your squash career and your podcast career, what would you choose?
That's once again, a great question.
It's well thought. I mean, it's such a powerful question. 2 people needed to get together to ask it.
I think both of them, in a way, asked it together because both of them are somewhat frustrated that they haven't been featured on the podcast just yet. They're somewhat offended, I think. So it's definitely a team effort on this question. But that's...
Well, I have taught you to play hard to get. You're successful there. That's good.
So this question is interesting because as long as I've been a squash player, a squash junior, I've never actually seen it turning into a career. I've used squash definitely as, a junior sport, and it'll definitely help me get into universities and play on a team in the NCAA, and it'll be amazing. But I don't really look at it much more than that. But when you argue for a podcast or a show like this, which involves an aspect of myself that I've always wanted to do in life as a career, that's where I can argue is if I had to choose, I think I'd have to go with the podcast because I really see myself becoming involved in this position, this platform of, either hosting a show or being involved in sports in that way. Definitely more than being a squash pro.
Right. So not necessarily a podcast, but just the idea of being in the broadcasting, just sharing what's going on in that brain of yours.
Well, yeah, you've known ever since I want to say it was probably like 6 years old or like 7 years old when I did those couple interviews against some of those squash pros, which I'm sure we're going to have to pull up a clip of that and show it on the podcast one day.
For sure.
First
one, I think when you did that pro event, the very, very first one, you gotta post it.
For sure. That'll just be, look where I was, look where I started and look where I am now type thing. But that's where it was, right? You've known ever since then. That was, that's what it was, right? That's what I always wanted to do, and I want to be involved in that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, this is definitely your calling, and whether it's just because it's a forum for you to be able to get your opinions out or your thoughts or share some ideas, I think yeah, to your point, I think a squash career is limited. It's
mhm.
sort of a springboard to other things, but I think you've probably found your calling. I have, if you can believe it, I have another collaborative question. Two people got together again to ask a question. This is from Hazel and Sarah. What made you want to start a podcast in the first place? Genuine interest in sports or the idea of a podcast? Very well thought out.
Very
Looking
well
forward to
thought
this
out.
answer.
Yeah, it's a multiple step question.
Mm-hmm.
Actually do have to admit, I don't think this was a getting together question. I think they both actually, in some way, said the same question. You know, their brains are so similar. They both asked the same question to me. So I kind of just joined them together. I hope they won't. I hope they won't be offended by that. But that's a great question, because I've been asked by so many people about that. Right? It's an interesting thing. At the age of 16, like when you're in school, why would you kind of want to, start a podcast? Everyone looks at those as, once again, a reason why I would is because there's not many young guys out there or my age that have shows like this. So everyone would say that a podcast is more of a maybe an adult thing, or they're always done by people as jobs in their 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever it is. But so that's why I think so many people ask that question, is because I'm just younger than the average to do something like this. And it definitely goes to that question to answer is I found it as such a unique thing to start and something I've always wanted to do. And, this summer during a time like this, I knew I needed to do something to, really, really take up some time
Yeah,
and, keep
sure.
me
Be
motivated in a
productive
tough
and
time like this. And, that's what we started.
so I don't know if Hazel and Sarah will let me into their little collaboration group, but I'm going to expand on their question. I'm assuming that they'll go with this. Which is, so there's a lot of pro athletes that, they get drafted right out of high school. They're that good, and they sort of face that moment in their life where, the team comes to them, offers them a ton of money, said, I want you to forego university, forego your education. I want you to bail right out of high school, and I want you to go into being professional sports. And it's hard to pass that up, because what if you got injured and, you're being offered millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So TSN comes to you, ESPN comes to you and says, F university, we want you to be an anchor tomorrow. Do you bail on university?
Wow.
I didn't prepare you with this one. I'm sure this is
I'm
something,
not
this is a
prepared.
very, very tough extension question from Sarah and Hazel.
Um, yeah, I have such a hard time, because that's where, throwing away university and stuff like that, of all that, education, and like I already mentioned before, if I went to go play squash, it's throwing away some of those years. Um, but once again, possibly one of the biggest opportunities that I could ever dream of, right? That's what I want to do in life, right? So if it's given to me that early, it would be so hard to turn down, because everything inside me would want to be involved and in that position as early as possible and for as long as possible, because I know that's what I love to do.
So if
But
they said to you, giving you this strategy, you can think about this for our next Q&A. It'll be my question for our next Q&A episode, which is, if they offered you zero to do it, but they gave you the opportunity, would you take it? Don't answer it now, but think about it. And then the other would be, if the answer is no, I would probably do the schooling because I'm not getting paid. Then the part two to that question would be, well, what's your number? So if they offered you 50 grand a year to do it, you might still say no. What would be your number? Is it 50 grand? Is it a million? Is it 10 million? Think about it.
I'm thinking about it.
Next.
I'm going to think about it real hard.
One of my favorite junior squash players has the next question. This is coming from way down in Rosedale from an Alex Usby. He says, if you could have someone dead or alive on the show, who would it be?
And I
I
wrote
don't
down
know
some
if
answers
anyway.
there. That's
Oh,
what
you
that's
did
what
write
that
down some
extra
answers.
writing
Yeah, so
down
you
is
saw this
there.
question.
Um,
Okay.
and this was an interesting one. I had a really hard time thinking about this one. Probably didn't come up with the best answers. But my first one, both people are alive. Just to get that out there to start. My first one would be family favorite athlete. I think you can both agree on this. Would be Roger Federer, and that's big for
Yes.
me
Great.
because one, I know you'd love it. I know my whole family would love it. And two, I've always looked at him as, kind of that, not the ideal athlete, but that ideal, way of an athlete, if you could say that. Because, he just lives such a chill lifestyle. He's incredible at his sport. He is definitely one of the best, if not the best to some people. And he just goes tournament by tournament, day by day, just living life.
And he was a really sucky junior, from what I understand. He was a real
Oh,
baby. So, I mean, I like to know how a person goes from being like a total baby to like being the Iceman.
yeah,
I
totally.
just think the transformation, whether it was just a natural evolution or whether he actually did something, whether his parents got involved, that would be very interesting to me,
Yeah,
to be
and I
that
ha- and I
mentally
had a
strong
second
in
answer
life.
here because it was tough to come up with just one. And this one, to speak what you just said, is I did choose Giannis Antetokounmpo. I may have totally butchered that, but he is definitely, ever since, maybe a little bit of a bandwagon, but ever since he kind of had that dominant position in the NBA, he's always been one of my favorite athletes. And I think with him, is the conversation would be so unique because he's from Greece, and he's come into the NBA and the United States from a childhood of having very little, like definitely uh, working hard to get as much as he could for basketball and education, everything like that. And look where he is now, type thing, right? And he's, not like the rest. He's very different, two-time like back-to-back MVP, and look where he's come from. So I think for me, I would want him to be on the show just because of the conversation we could have. Is he's just such a cool guy and a crazy story. So I think I'd like to talk to him about that.
And he might be able to help you pronounce his name,
Yeah,
which would be
that
cool.
would that would be good.
This next question is, hang on, the person says, you are so adorable, you're accomplished, you're smart, you're charming, intelligent. Hang on, there's not even a question here. This is just a comment. Who's this from? Oh, that's from mom.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
That's not even a question.
That was the note she left on my bedside table this morning. You're
Oh,
reading the
right,
wrong thing.
right.
Come on.
How are we doing for time, Josh?
I think we're doing all good.
Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question, which is from Eli, which is, which NBA player do you think will break out the most this season?
It's a very good
I
question.
know who you might think, and then there's the other side, which is, who do you hope?
Yeah,
Two
exactly.
very
And
different.
one player is in here is actually a bit of both for sure. This was another hard one to think about because there's a decent amount, and I didn't want to be biased, which I kind of was in a way, unfortunately, and I didn't want to speak to my fantasy teams a little just so I could try and raise my spirits that my team was going to be really good. But the three players I came up with were fellow Toronto Raptor Pascal Siakam. Definitely a bias. He is on my fantasy team, but people are saying he's given the opportunity. He had a great season last year, but a rough time in the bubble for sure in the
Yeah,
playoffs.
rough playoff for
Lots of
sure.
people talking about, is he good enough to be that star? Is he good enough to lead the team? And I'm willing to risk with him that I think he's going to definitely prove himself right. Like he's going to prove himself to the crowd and the fans that he's a really good basketball player and he's there
Agreed.
to win. My next one, once again, a little bit of a bias because it is definitely my favorite basketball jersey that I own. It's the Jamal Murray, fellow Canadian as well. And after the playoffs, I just can't see him not being, a real star in the league. I just can't see it. Some guys are arguing that with the other players on his team is he's got a really good team. So it's not like he's got that opportunity to go insane and drop 30 points a game and a triple-double every time, right? But I still think he's kind of built that little bit of confidence that he needed, and he's a destruction on court. It's insane, and I love watching him. And my last one was, like everyone I'm sure can assume, is Zion Williamson getting into his second season. And yes, they've announced that he doesn't have any minutes restriction. And all I can say to that is if he can stay healthy and he cannot injure himself again, he is insanely athletic, insanely fast at 280 pounds.
Yeah, insane.
It's definitely injury prone, but at the same time, if he can stay away from the injuries, he is going to be devastating to anyone coming up against him. So, and with no minutes restriction, they're giving him all the opportunity he needs. Yeah.
Maybe the approach the Raptors had with Kawhi in the playoff year, don't play him all the time, right? Don't have an unlimited amount of minutes. Make sure that they're well rested. I mean, kind of proved a different model that it actually does work. Keep the guy, better to have a guy at 95 to 100% when he's on the floor rather than someone who is, maybe it's 70% every day. Or maybe it's 70%, it's 70% every day and then a whole bunch of time off, which is zero. So, and who knows, maybe an interesting approach. But I mean, anyone that's that kind of size, that has to be that athletic in a league, that the way the league is now, I mean, you got to rest those guys. They're going to be prone to injury for sure. Okay, great question from our friend Ryan Getty. Solid athlete in his own right, as we know, an absolute beast, tough guy, who's going to ask about a tough sport. So he's asking probably the most important question of our modern day time, which is, do the Leafs have a chance this year?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Now, we're coming up, and if they don't win this season, I mean, odds are they won't, but if they don't win this season, it'll be 54 years. 54-year drought. That's pretty significant. We're going to start getting into not all-time, droughts, but we're going to be getting up there for current teams that have not, in professional sports, that have not won a championship.
Yeah, and me, I have become, unfortunately, with the Leafs, a little bit of that, hop on the bandwagon once they make the playoffs type person.
Well, you have to for your own sanity, right? I mean, you can't get disappointed over and over again and put your whole heart and soul into it.
For sure. And, I'll watch the occasional regular season game. If it's on, it's on. I still love watching it. But my opinion in this sort of question would be, I think that for the past however many years it's been that they've made the playoffs and have had this insane team, have had odds of winning it, I think there's been a high chance every single year. The only factor that I can say that's going to change those things is if the players and the coaching is willing to do it. That's all I can really say, right? They've gone up against Boston, whatever it is, 3 of the past 5 years and lost to them every time. There's obviously some mental challenges that those guys need to go through. And you look at some of those players and where they rank in the league right now and where the talent is, and so much talent. I think there's definitely a chance, if not a high chance, that they are going to win, if not be very good contenders this year. Hey guys, so sorry for the abrupt ending, but we went on and on for a long time with all of your different questions for this Q&A episode that we thought we would break it into a 2-part episode, part 1, part 2, and hopefully your answers will be answered in the part 2 if they weren't in this part 1. But we thought we'd keep the content going, so we break it up, not keep the episodes too long. But that is going to do it for us. Thanks so much for tuning into this part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. Obviously, like to thank our sponsor, IPS Insurance. Without them, none of this would be possible. And I'd like to thank you guys for supporting the show in any way that you can. But that's going to be it for me, guys. I'm going to be signing off. If I don't see you soon, have a great rest of your week. And stay safe out there. We'll see you soon. Bye.